Welcome back to Succession Stories. I'm your host, Laurie Barkman. I am so excited for my guest today. She started her entrepreneurial career at the age of 8. And then she launched her first company at the age of 23. She's got an amazing years of business leadership and experience from all different kinds of companies. And how she puts that in the world now is working with entrepreneurial businesses to help them thrive and help them build a thriving business. She's the author of 2 books about joy and entrepreneurship, and she is the founder of a software company called Quantix. She's the host of the Happy Productive podcast, and I was on her show, and I'm so glad to welcome the owner, founder, and president of Jennifer Dawn Consulting, Jennifer Dawn. Welcome.
Hi, Lori. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here today.
I'm so glad that podcasting brought us together. That's how we
I
met, and it's
know.
kind of an amazing thing. And I'm so glad that you're here because I really want to learn about your entrepreneurial story. You have built and sold businesses. You've had ups and downs in businesses. You've seen it all.
Yeah.
So let's start with the first question. Tell me about the software company that you
Yeah.
built. How did you get into building a software company at the nice ripe age of 23?
I know, right? And I just literally thought I could do it better. And that ultimately was what really started the company. But before that, I had worked for one of the competitors in the industry because I'm like, who does this kind of stuff, right? It's such a very niche thing. And so I had a job working for a company that did point of sale software for family entertainment places. So when you think about a water park, a museum, a ski resort, places like that where you go to buy a ticket to get admission. So that those are the kinds of systems that they did. And I think I was with them for about a year and a half. And during my time with them, they had me on the road all the time, but they went and they bought 3 of their competitors. So while I was with them and I learned their system, they bought all these competitors and then I learned all of those systems. And so I was the person out on the road trying to like manage this giant mess that they had created, but I learned all these systems and I got to really be very familiar with a lot of the clients and their issues and their challenges. And I love technology and I love software. And so when I left that company because it was just a giant disaster, that's really what started me on like, you know what? I could do this so much better. I understand the needs of the clients. I obviously want to take very good care of them. And so that was it. So that's how I started my software company, was just like, I can do it better, not really knowing much else about that. But then I did end up I had it for 13 years. And over that time, we grew it to 7 figures. And it was actually my husband who was the lead developer. And then in the company, I did everything else. So I was literally the person. And Lori, back in the day when you had to demo software, you had to get on an airplane. I had to take these giant cases with like computers and touchscreen monitors and ticket printers. I would lug them to a client site. I would have to set everything up, show them how to use the software, pack it all back up again. So that was like a long time ago. But that's what I did. So I did all the sales, I did the service, I did the installation, I did the design of the system, all of the pieces. I did everything except code. So that was my little Quantix company, and I absolutely loved that company and grew it from literally our first year, our sales were $300. So grew it from ground zero up to a 7-figure business.
Wow. So it was focused on the amusement industry, a
Yeah,
point of sale solution for the amusement industry. Such an interesting niche. How
right.
many clients did you end up having at the peak?
We probably had close to 100 different properties that were using our software. And we started actually expanding internationally because we had a lot of different people here in the US. So, yeah, I was just in New Orleans and we went to the aquarium and we bought our tickets. And I was showing my daughter, I'm like, you see these tickets? That's what your mama used to do. Because it really was. It was just a great industry and a really fun product.
Amazing. And so ahead of its time. Imagine if you had the cloud platform you could have built a recurring revenue model on that. And so it was they had to install, they had to get the
Yeah.
hardware, as you were saying, you were lugging the software, all the equipment all over the country just to do demos. I can only imagine that potential. What do you reflect on as you built that business and trying to get to scale? How many employees did you have at peak?
At peak, we had about 15 different employees. I didn't know really how to lead and manage people the way I do now. So it was really a headache. It was a giant headache because I felt like I was always babysitting. I was always having to go back behind them. I was always having to clean up messes. And it was a drain, to be honest. But at our peak, we had about 15 employees. But I was still like very, very much like, in the trenches. And when I had that business, I also had our first two children. And so through pregnancy, nursing, new babies, traveling, it was definitely it was hard. It was really, really hard to grow this company and also be growing children at the same time, while everything else was going on.
At the time, did you think about the company as one of your babies? Did you talk about it that way, that my company is my baby?
I don't think I talked about it that way, but I definitely felt very much like this is my thing. Like this is a part of who I am. I feel really felt like a part of my identity was in that company. My kids, I've never been like a baby talk kind of person, even with my children. So I never would be like, oh, this business is my baby. But it was definitely one of just like part of my identity is really how I would just really relate to it.
Well, this is succession stories. So, of course, thematically, you know what question's coming next, which is how did you know when you were ready for a transition? And what was that? What happened?
Well, I wasn't really ready. I went through a divorce. And so my husband and I split somewhat amicably, as amicable as it can be when you're going through a divorce. And I did not want to let go of the company. I actually wanted to keep the company going, hire a developer and run it myself. And so we actually had an agreement that I was going to buy the company out from him. And that was the agreement all the way up until the end when it came time to actually do the transaction. And he changed his mind. He decided that he was like not going to sell. He's like, I don't think I can trust you to run it. And it's just like, dude, like, where do you think all this has come from? But I was like, okay, what are you going to do? I'm not going to fight about it. But I was really sad. I was really, really sad. So we changed the agreement and he ended up buying me out of the company. And so I moved on and I was not happy about it, Lori. I'd put my heart and soul into that company. But it was, I had done such a good job with all the clients that the company is still he literally has been living off that company this whole time. So obviously I did something right that he was able to kind of live off the company, but we really disagreed on where it should go. I wanted to continue growing it. He just wanted to just use what we had accomplished and just, run it and that's it. He didn't want to do any more. So there was a big disagreement there on what we should even do with the company. So he ended up buying it. He did exactly what he wanted to do. Of just he's lived off it all this time, and I went on to go do other things.
Wow. So, as you know, you've gotten to know me. We've talked so much off air. I work with clients to help them prepare. I help them think through their personal transition, their
Yeah,
readiness. This probably hit you like a brick wall. You weren't
yeah,
ready for that. You were imagining that you were going to own the business.
right.
How did you get through that?
I have always survived everything, Lori, in my life. I didn't have a very great childhood growing up, and there was a lot of things there for me to overcome. And honestly, I'd gotten to the place. So the divorce was very difficult just because this is a person you have children with, you have a business with, like everything was tied together. And so I'd been just like slowly peeling these layers away, regaining my independence, finding myself again. So it just to me kind of felt like that last little piece of just like, all right, Jen, if you really want to be free of this, this is going to be the next piece. And so I just kind of had to let it go. It sucked. It sucked and it was very, very hard. And I had to just sort of like move through it and be willing to step into a new future, even though it was very uncertain and I didn't really know what that was going to look like.
At that point, you were in your 30s or in your 40s?
Yeah, so I would have been I was in my 30s. Yep,
30s.
absolutely, in my mid 30s.
So young mother, two kids,
Yep,
and a company that's now with your partner, who is your former husband. That's a lot. That's a
yeah.
lot. I can only imagine that how that felt at that time, and I appreciate you sharing that. it was difficult. I can imagine that
Yeah.
it was. What kind of support did you have? Family, friends, other advisors to help you?
No real support. One friend was a very religious person, and when she found out I was getting a divorce, she basically disowned me and sided with my ex-husband and was just like, "What's he gonna do now without you?" I'm like, "Oh boy." So not a huge support system there at all. And I would love to say, yes, the story has had a happy ending, but at that time, it didn't get better, Lori. It got worse.
Yeah.
It got worse because I was just like, all right, what am I going to do now? And so I actually went out and I bought another company. So I wanted just a complete different thing because I was very sad at having to leave this industry, start all over again. And so I went and I bought a log home company. At the time I lived in Montana. I know that sounds crazy, but in Montana, a log home company is not a crazy thing to have. So that's what I did. I went and I bought a log home company and I was just going to start a whole new business, whole different industry. It was an existing company that had been in business for quite some time. And so I bought that and was just like, here I go. And at the time, I wanted to stay in Montana because even though I had been divorced, I wanted to stay close to my kids. Obviously, didn't want to have to uproot them and all of that. So that's where the next step became of like buying this next company.
Wow. So let's talk about that. Becoming a acquisition entrepreneur. I talk with
Yeah,
so many different people in my role as an M&A advisor, buy side, sell side. People want to try to find a business to buy because it's less risky
yeah,
than launching one. It's also shorter time to market than
yeah.
launching one from scratch. And you had that experience. How did you go about sourcing the log home business? Was it a seller? Was it a seller you knew from the community?
It was a seller, absolutely from the community. I did not know, but it was introduced to me. And I went through the process of getting, so I had cash, obviously, from the sale of my software company. I took money out from a bank loan, which they surprisingly gave me. In my years of my software company, the bank never wanted to touch us, but yet, like, okay, wait, this is a local business, local people, a little bit of that good old boys club thing going on. And so got the bank loan financing, and I'd never bought a company before. So I did the due diligence that I knew to do, bought the company, dove in 100%. And at the same time that year, the real estate market just completely tanked. And people were not able to really invest in these kinds of homes. And then as I got into it, I realized that the owners had just literally run everything into the ground. And I didn't know any better. So it was just like, wait, I thought there was all this potential. I was sold a lot of potential. When you get into it and you realize, no, they have basically sucked everything there is to suck out of this business. And it was misrepresented a bit. And so anybody who's bought a company may know what that is like, and it's not good. And so I ended up, honestly, it was a massive failure, and I had to close my doors within a year. So I went from like having cash, buying this new business, to being tremendously in debt, having to close my doors with the company, basically just give everything, all the assets and things, just kind of had to surrender everything. And then I was sort of back to what do I do now? Because I don't have anything at this point. So I had to sort of start all over. Not sort of, I had to start all over again, which is what then transitioned me to my position in corporate. So I ended up taking a corporate position with a huge $54 million manufacturing company, and I became their software division president. So I went back to software. It was point of sale software, but this time for the car wash industry. So whole different industry, but I understood point of sale. And so, yeah, I became their software division president and ended up moving across the country. So left Montana, had to uproot the kids, unfortunately, moved to South Florida. And yeah, that was the next chapter.
Wow, that's an amazing story. Um, if you're going to reflect back on that experience buying the company, what advice would you give yourself and do differently?
I would have definitely done more of my due diligence, but at that time and who I am, I just go into things 100% and I give it everything that I've got. Being able to look back now, I'm so grateful because that failure gave me experience that as a business coach today, if you've never had a failed business, you can't you can't go to school and learn what it's like to have a failed business. So it gave me so much experience that at the time was horrible. I hated it. It was miserable going through it. But now looking back, I'm like, thank goodness. Like, I know what it's like to have cash. I know what it's like to spend it on a business. It fails. I know what it's like to be in a ton of debt. I learned probably my best money lessons were having to then go through the next 3 years of getting out of all of that debt and paying everything off, having your credit score completely destroyed, learning that the world still spins even if your credit score sucks. It does. All the things that they tell you, that you can't survive if your credit score isn't whatever. I'm like, guess what? My credit score was way low and I still survived and I negotiated and I got it all figured out. So like some of the very, very best lessons came from all of that. Just at the time, I couldn't see it. Now I can look back and go, thank God. It's made me such a better coach today. And to be in a place with my clients of like, I understand failure. I do. I really get it.
So that little voice looking back now might say to you, hang in there, it will get better. You're building from this and it'll help you. You
Yeah.
joined corporate, and at some point then you said, wait a minute, my entrepreneurial gene is kicking in here.
Yeah.
Tell me
Yeah.
about that transition.
Yeah, so I joined corporate. The first year was a dream. I was like, at the time, my software, my division, our revenues were multiple six figures. I took us into seven figures in a very short period of time. I mean, for me, it was so easy because I had the experience, and now you're in this big corporate environment and you have a human resources department, a marketing department, an IT department. And it's just like I was all those departments before. So you have all these amazing resources. And the company had been purchased from the manufacturing company. So they bought the software company before I was ever involved. And what ended up happening was that they had bought a lot of problems in the source code and it was there, it was kind of buried. The owner just wanted it. He bought it anyway. And so what happened was as I came in and I started putting a load on this software, which was in the cloud. So this was a SaaS point of sale product. I start putting a load on this software because I'm like selling and building and growing, and we start seeing some symptoms of problems. And I'm like, what is going on? And we'd hired a couple developers, and they quit like right away. And we're like, what's happening? And so one of the developers, I literally cornered him on his way out the door, and I'm just like, I need to know what's going on in here. And he's like, your source code's a disaster. Like, I don't even want to be a part of it. I'm like, oh my God. So that led me to kind of dig. And as I dig, I find the initial assessment from this company of like where they said, hey, you got some really big problems in your source code. And they actually recommended that they didn't buy the company. So they did it anyway, and they bought the company. So it's just like, here's this huge problem. And I remember sitting at my desk that day and going, if I tell what I found, it's going to be the end of my career. It was just my intuition, just like Jennifer, if you tell, it's going to be over. And there was a bigger part of me that was just like, I know who I am. I need to be able to sleep at night. And so I did. I was like, look, here's what I found. Like, you bought the problem, but like, here's how you fix it. Like, we can redesign the system. I know enough now about the industry. I can design the whole system. We build it. Like, it's the fastest way to get ourselves back on track. They didn't want to do that. They wanted to fix it, and they brought in the company that had done the initial assessment. They threw $1 million at it, didn't fix the problem, made the problem bigger. And they ended up kind of blaming me for it and being like, hey, I was a very male dominated industry. I love men. I just want to be very clear. I love men. But in this male dominated industry, they were far more interested in blaming the woman in the room for all the problems, even, and they did not want to take my advice on how to fix it. So they went their own way, and it ended up being a giant disaster. So I became very, very disillusioned of just like not wanting to fix things the right way, all the past history, how they all handled it. And so I left corporate just like, okay. Plus, my own little entrepreneurial gene was starting to itch again of just like, at least when you're a business owner and you need to do things the right way, you have the ability to do that. And I'd lost that in corporate. So that kind of set me on the path of now starting to figure out, well, what in the world am I going to do now?
Yeah. The entrepreneurial gene was in you. It's always been in you, right? Whether you have your own company or not, I would say in your experience at corporate, I'd describe it as corporate entrepreneurship, right?
Yeah.
Intrapreneurship. You could hear that word a lot. Regardless, it's about the skill set, it's about the mindset for growth and doing things in a flexible, nimble way. But at the same time, knowing that you've got to satisfy the market demand or it's going to implode. So, wow, it sounds like a really frustrating experience that you went through, but you found yourself on the other side of it. You found yourself saying, hey, I want to run my own show again. Well, what
Yeah.
did you do at that point?
Well, at that point, I wanted to run my own show, but I had a lot of emotional stuff that I needed to process, a lot of grief, a lot of anger, a lot of those kinds of things. I hired a life coach to help me move through those things. I ended up meeting a new guy and we relocated up to New York. We got to New York and I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. So I go to a women's networking event in the city and I end up meeting the founder of a women's networking organization. A few weeks later, she offers me a position running their masterminding and accountability circles. And it just started to set me on this path of like doing something in a completely different industry. So I really didn't know, and I don't want to say that I did because I didn't. I had no idea. In fact, it was a really dark time of just like, what is happening here? Like, you're on this track with your software company, then you have a failed business, and then you're just like, corporate wasn't what I thought it was going to be. What in the world am I going to do with myself now? And it was a really hard time to just kind of like, I felt like I just continued to reinvent myself. And so the women's networking really was very pivotal because I didn't even realize the experience that I had. I'd grown a business, seven-figure business on my own. I'd grown another one in corporate. And so now I've done it twice. And if you know any of the stats, 4% of business owners ever cross the seven-figure mark, and less than 2% are women. So here I am coming in, and they're just like, you have all this great experience. And I didn't even know that I had this wealth of knowledge. And so I start mentoring all these women business owners, and I am loving it, loving, loving, loving. And so the agreement that we came up with was I would have a small salary and I would grow the business and I would have equity in the company. That was the deal. And again, like gangbusters, I'm there, I'm tripling revenues. They made me the president of the company. Like it's just going so, so well. And then, Lori, I asked for the written agreement because we'd had verbally, and ding dong me, trusting, didn't get it in writing. And so everything's going really well. And I start asking for this agreement, and I keep getting these excuses. It's at the accountant's, it's in my car, I blah, blah, blah. And my husband is the one who pointed it out to me. He's like, honey, she's using you. And I did not want to hear it. I was so angry at him for even saying that. But once it was out there, I was like, it's true. She is. She's using me. And she never honored the agreement. She never presented the agreement. And then she turned it around on me of like, what's wrong with you? Why don't you trust me? It's like, because like you're being untrustworthy. So I ended up resigning, again, devastated, have to start all over again. But there's a silver lining, Lori, there's a silver lining. Because of that, I launched my coaching practice. And I had clients from day one, literally day one, no exaggeration, because women who had been coaching and working with me were like, Jennifer, we still want to work with you, even though I had resigned and left the organization. And the owner was very tight-lipped. She wouldn't tell anybody what happened. And it's like, well, of course. She's since out of business, by the way. Just a little side note there. So,
Side note, yeah, noted. So
yeah,
noted.
exactly. Little side note. But these beautiful women wanted to coach with me. And so I had coaching clients right from day one. And now I've had my coaching practice for over a decade. I've grown this business to seven figures. It is the most beautiful, wonderful, amazing work I've ever done. It's truly my passion. It's exactly what I'm supposed to be doing. And now when I look back at all that experience of, the toxic corporate environment and growing a business, failing a business, getting screwed by your partner, like all of those things, it gave me this vast wealth of knowledge that I can't even count how many times I've been able to tap into to help other business owners. And you just are never going to have that if you haven't been out in the trenches with businesses. Any kind of a person who goes to school to learn how to be a business coach, that's nice, good for you, great. but it's just different than having that actual experience. And so looking back now, I'm very grateful. Going through it, it was pretty tough. Like, where am I going to get here where I can stop starting over?
Amazing how all those experiences, the ups and the downs, you were able to put it all together and
Yeah,
help other entrepreneurs build their businesses and be able to thrive.
yeah.
And nobody would have wished that on you, right? Nobody
Uh-uh.
wishes the valleys. We all want the peaks, but the reality is in the entrepreneurial journey, that's what it is, right? It's the
Yeah,
peaks and the valleys. And and I read in your bio that you kind of elevated the lemonade stand, to an apple cart when you were 8 years old. And I'm going to come back to the lemonade, right? You made a wonderful lemonade
yeah.
and a wonderful applesauce out of something that might have just rotted on the vine. And I have so much respect for you for that. That was a very, very difficult thing, I'm sure.
It really was. And now it's one of our guiding principles at Jennifer Dawn Coaching is that we call it crap into gold. Like whatever crap you've been dealt, there's gold there. And that's actually one of the things I think as a coach that I'm really, really good at taking something bad and pulling the gold from it and being able to turn it into something beautiful, whether it's learning or wisdom or experience or a shortcut for next time, whatever it is. And that's definitely a running theme. And one of our biggest core values is just like, hey, here's what it is, but what can we do with it that's going to make it as good as it possibly can be?
I love that. We have talked about a lot. We've talked about a lot, but I'm going to ask you if there are three things that you want our audience to remember and take away and take action on, what would those three things be?
Three things. Number one would be do your inner work. I did not grow up in a household, a very dysfunctional family. And so when we say inner work, what does that really mean? Learn about yourself, learn about your emotions, learn how to process negative emotions, learn how to turn, challenges into opportunities, heal the past. Okay. All that wounding. I just carried it forward because I didn't know any better. And I just said, I'm fine, and I never did any of that kind of inner work. As I've gotten older, when I hired that life coach in corporate, that's really what kind of started my personal inner work journey. And I still do that kind of work on myself every single day without fail. So when you do that inner work and you start to heal the wounds of the past, you start to clear out your limiting beliefs, you can do so much more, so much faster. So, number one, make your own inner work a priority. When you start to be the denominator and all the stuff going on, it's like, hey, guess what? You're the denominator. So, number one is definitely make your own inner work a priority and do it. Number two is trust. Trust. Like I love the visualization of when you're driving at night and you can only see as far as the headlights go, but you trust that the road is there and that it's going to lead you to where you want to go. And so anybody who might be going through like a dark time right now, just trust that this isn't the end. It's not the worst thing ever. Just try and trust that it really and truly is leading you to somewhere beautiful that you can absolutely go. And number three would be at the end of the day, do the work. If you, it's one thing to learn and sit and talk about all this stuff, but at the end of the day, if you don't take action, you don't get the result. And so just show up and do the work. Now, I didn't say work yourself into the ground, which I have done many times. No, not anymore. But like you do have to show up, do the work, take some action if you really want to get the result. And at the end of the day, like action is what, that's what matters. So those would be my three.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing those. We got to make our mark and we got to do it with impact, and
Yeah.
being able to reflect and have intentions are super, super important. Jennifer, if people want to learn more, get in touch with you, what's a good way to do that?
Absolutely. You can find me on my website, which is jenniferdawncoaching.com. We do answer our contact form if you reach out to us. You can find links to all of my social profiles. I'm on LinkedIn. Come find me on LinkedIn. Absolutely. I'm probably there the most. And yeah, but jenniferdawncoaching.com would be the main place that you can find everything.
Amazing. I love to ask everyone for their favorite quote, and I am sure that you have many, but is there one that you can share with me?
Yes, one of my very, very favorite quotes is by Dolly Parton. And she said, "You'll never do a whole lot unless you're brave enough to try." And for me, anytime I feel that fear and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just remember that of just like, am I brave enough to try? And usually the answer is yes.
Brave enough to try. I love
Yeah,
it. Jennifer, thank you. Thank you so much for being on Succession Stories with me here today.
you're welcome. Thanks for having me, Lori.
And to our audience, thank you. Thank you for listening, tuning in. I hope today's conversation moved you, and I hope that you share it with someone who you think it'll move them as well. If you've been watching on YouTube, our channel is Business Transition Sherpa. Be sure to follow us there. And of course, follow the show in your favorite podcast player. If you've been moved, and I hope you have, maybe you'll leave us a rating and review. It really helps us with the show and helps others find the content. So thank you again to my guest, Jennifer, and thank you for listening. This has been another great episode of Succession Stories, and we'll see you next time.